Now, many of our viewers have probably seen Gavin Arends reading our news on Deen TV. And he's on Smile FM and he's doing lots of radio things and TV things and all kinds of things. And we're going to find out more about his latest project, Your Radio. Gavin, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great being here, and a bit strange too, not reading the news and being in a studio.
I know it's strange looking at you sitting on one of these couches, because one is sort of accustomed to seeing you sitting in that very formal environment reading the news on Deen TV, and then people listen to you on Smile FM, and if they don't know yet who you are, they're going to find out a bit more. Tell me, Gavin Arends, I know that you come from a corporate background, and then you've had this media thing happening on the side, and you're going all the way into that. How does the relation go? Because it's going from corporate into a world which is very strange, and that's media.
Well, the strange thing is that media was actually there before corporate. It started for me when I was a student at UWC back in 1993 when I joined UWC Radio, and even that was a bit strange. I didn't choose to go into radio. It kind of chose me. We were doing an orientation program, and a friend of mine at the time, Safura, came to me and she said, "You must go down to this radio station," because for some reason she just thought I sounded good. And I said, "Okay, let me humor you. Let's go down to the radio station, see what's going on there." And I never looked back since that day. And so I really have almost an incident to thank, and a lady by the name of Safura. Well, I don't know where she is in the world at the moment, but yeah, that's how it started for me.
So how many years ago was this?
It was in 1993, which makes it 21 years and a little bit.
That's quite a long time, Gavin. Now, at that time, you obviously decide to also work in the corporate world, which I know that some of my family members know you from. Was that always for you, or did you find the balance between the two? Because people in media, although that media companies today are corporately run, but it's a strange balance to be in, because you're talking about creative personalities and people that are generally quite eccentric about the way they are. And then you're talking about a very conservative corporate environment. So what was the balance for you?
Look, the balance to me was in terms of life in general, and you keep telling yourself that until you reach a point where you think, you know what, maybe I have done myself in over time. The corporate world happened because I was studying, and you know, you study one thing and you invariably end up doing that, because in your mind and the way we've been conditioned as society, we've led to believe that that will pay the bills, and it did. It paid off the bond, it buys the cars. And you're not so sure, because you would know media is a very, very fickle thing. One day it's up and you're making it big, the next day you're down and you have to almost grovel for food and what you have. So to me, I married about 14 years ago, and it's not that I didn't have opportunities to go into radio full time, I did, but the fact that you had other responsibilities other than yourself at the time meant that you chose the safer option, which at the time was the corporate environment for me. At the same time though, I do appreciate those opportunities and the learnings from the corporate world, because I'm so much richer in terms of management and way of doing things, and much more methodical about how I go about business as it is at the moment. And that's all thanks to the learnings and the I suppose courses and experience that you gained in a corporate setup. So I'm taking all of that into my new venture, which is Your Radio, which I hope to then grow from here.
I'm very happy that I'm hearing this from you, because I always believed that it was the fusion of the corporate environment and the media philosophies in terms of the creativity and the arts and that sort of thing that actually made the success story. Because if you look at the two polarities, if you're totally on the corporate side, the media is not going to be too happy with you, because you're not exuding an sort of creative environment and that sort of thing. And then if you're too creative and you're not worried about the business aspect of it, you will also be at a loss. And you've said the right thing, and that was, it's the fusion of the two. And I think that your time in the corporate world has probably helped you to fuse that two together. And that's where we're coming to the next point, and that is, we've been hearing about Your Radio. Now, I know you don't want me to call it UOFM and all those kind of things, and you have your reasons for that, which we're going to find out about soon. Now, Smile FM is there, you're reading the news on Deen TV for a while now already. Has that enhanced the project that you're busy starting before we look into the actual project itself?
Maybe the word enhanced is too light a word in terms of the impact that it's had on the project.
Oh, so you realize it's a 24-hour business, 7 days a week?
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I go home from reading the news, I go straight to work at Your Radio. And when I say it enhances, too light a word, it's actually propelled my thinking in a direction where I came up with ideas that I would never have otherwise had I not been involved in media elsewhere. Going back, I said I've been involved in radio for 21 years, of which the last 2 have been with Smile. Smile is the first commercial radio station that I've been involved in. I've been otherwise involved in community radios all my life. The last 2 years, though, has taught me a very different type of radio. And so you ask about Smile, and I say it's given me another thinking around radio and how it should work. And it's a lot more corporate, a lot more aligned with what I was used to in a corporate environment. And hence, it was easy almost over the last 2 years to make that and to make that decision. Look, is this the right thing to do? Absolutely, because I'm not really leaving corporate behind. It's just transferring skills into another realm and to another aspect of my life, which is media. The news reading, what it has taught me is discipline. In terms of delivery, with TV, it's slightly different from radio, where in radio it's almost one-dimensional, where you concentrate on the voice and delivery, whereas here you've got so many other aspects. And the big thing that it has taught me is you can't do this other than radio, or unlike radio where you can do a show on your own, you cannot do this as a one-man show. And I've kind of taken that on into your radio as well. And already, even setting up the studio wasn't a one-man thing. You realize that look, there are other role players, and that as a team you have to start working together. So influence not just from here and from the corporate and from Smile, but from all over life, I believe, is what's going to go forward and make your radio what it's going to, or I hope it's going to become.
Gavin, I'd like to sort of take one step back and look at the word your radio. Now, most people would think that would be spelled as Y-O-U-R, but that's not the case. It's your, like your, because of Cape Town, and that's where the word comes from. Now, our viewers are national, so we need to explain to them, where has this all come from?
Yeah, maybe I should start by saying the way I hear it. The name is your radio. You would identify with that.
Yes.
Equally, you could say your radio, or
Yeah.
your radio.
Yeah. So you're covering all the demographics.
It's about more than covering demographics. Actually, it's about an expression of emotion, because that word your is a very expressive word. You can use it in describing almost any emotion that you feel at any time, and your would be appropriate. And that's exactly what I'm tapping on. It's not an acronym for anything. It is absolutely an expression of emotion. And so what I hope in my mind's eye, what I see is, or I hear is, when the presenters eventually start using your, and when people who respond to what they hear on air use that word your, that it would come out with whatever emotion they're feeling at the time. And this is what I'm hoping to drive. And I'm actually really leading into strategy now already around your radio. It's going to absolutely be emotion. Not emotion as in I feel soppy about something now, but emotion as in what the people are feeling at the time about issues, about their lives, about whatever aspect of reality that they're facing at the time. But it's also about values. It's going to be a very value-driven radio station. And when I say values, I don't necessarily mean any religious values or anything like that. I'm just talking about good values. Our country has evolved over the last 20 years of democracy into what we have become today. And my sense is that a lot of people out there are not very happy with what they're perceiving at the moment. And one of the reasons is, over the last 20 years, one of the things that you started hearing more and more often is that our values systems have been eroded over time. And what I would hope...
Sorry, just stop you there. When you're talking about the value systems, are you referring to when we in television talk about clean, moral, family viewing? Is that what you're referring to? No alcohol, no drugs, no under the belt language? Is that what you're referring to?
That's exactly what I'm referring to. Just to give you an example, back in the day in our black communities, the father figure or my daughter would be the one leading the community or the families. Over time, and with the advent of HIV/AIDS, where you have children-headed households, things like that, that notion has disappeared slowly over time. What I'm trying to do with your radio, apart from just creating and stirring and engaging with people's emotions, is to bring back those traditional values and make people understand, listen, but you don't have to always be bad to be perceived as good, as things have become in this world. I'm absolutely attempting with this, and I'm going to make the statement, to bring back especially values around family, because in society, once the family start breaking down, everything else tends to fall apart. And so that's exactly where your radio is pitched, as at families and re-establishing values that have eroded over time. Now, I'm not saying that every family is like that. The hope is that a family that's intact will identify with what we're trying to do and listen anyway and tune in anyway into your radio.
So you're looking at the big picture, but from a grassroots level. And that's where you're going to take this and say, well, you're going to affect change by doing what you do, by looking at family values and enhancing that with the medium that you rather created.
Yeah, but it's more than that. You know, when you think in terms of your radio, and you think in terms of employing, whether it's DJs, whether it's newsreaders, whether it's marketing staff, whoever is going to, whether it's somebody who's going to make a cup of tea for guests, the idea is to bring people on board with those values. And so it's not about creating those values or tapping into values. It's about those listening picking up on the values that we live within the radio station. And that's ultimately what I think is going to make the difference, because it's not something that I'd like to forge or like to force, but it's something that must just exist within the radio station, and hopefully others will pick up on it. And that's the difference, because often media organizations get established to push a certain into a certain direction and a certain agenda. And I think that's where a lot of radio stations already have gone wrong in Cape Town. They've tried too hard to fabricate something that they think should exist. What my approach with your radio would rather be to create that microcosm inside the radio station that you would, or that culture that you would like to people to buy into, create it inside the radio station, and those who feel the same way will gravitate towards it.
I know that you're predominantly based in the Cape Town area. You speak about democracy, you're talking about family values. How do you see your radio embracing the South Africanness when it comes to the actual broadcast and your market approach?
Well, let's put it this way. Essentially, I've spoken about your radio and where we pitched, and you know, the culture within the radio station that I'd like to cultivate. Essentially, people, whether you're South African, whether you're Nigerian, whether you're American, doesn't matter. I'm not pitching it at a certain specific audience. Yes, we're going to be housed in Cape Town, and most of the listeners naturally will be Cape Townian, and so we need to strike a chord with the immediate listenership. But whether you live in Nigeria, whether you live in South Africa, it doesn't matter where you live, people essentially want the same thing. They want good values. Right. And so I'm hoping to establish an entity that will live those values, where people will buy into it. Coming back into how to make it marketable and how to spread it possibly wider in South Africa. Look, without saying too much about strategy, about the radio station, the hope is eventually to go on to terrestrial FM and get a license to broadcast locally in Cape Town. But it's also got a presence on the web, which is already streaming. The idea is to not necessarily have a single radio station. I hear what I'm saying. I'm not saying that your radio is going to be two separate stations. It's still going to be the same ideology, same philosophy. It's going to be the same culture. It's going to persist. It's just some parts of the day you're going to have a separate stream going out internationally and a separate stream going out locally. And I'm especially looking at things like, if you look at traffic reports in the morning, what's relevant for Cape Town is not relevant for Abu Dhabi, for example. So if somebody from, say, Sydney must tune in during our peak breakfast time, most of the content they will be able to listen to. But while a traffic report goes out, something else might go out to the outside world. And so to make it more marketable and more open, firstly, it's not going, and you alluded to it before, it's not going to be called your FM per se, it's called your radio, because that's essentially what we're doing. Firstly, we're doing radio before we attach it to a single
medium of distribution, yes.
Yeah, of distribution, absolutely. I'm also looking at things like satellite distribution. I'm thinking about,
apps on phones, all those kind of things. With media convergence today, there's so many avenues that a station like yours could be going to. And I think you need to perhaps, and I think you're probably going to be embracing all of that as you go down the line.
Yes, you would find that existing radio, and this is where a new entity, a new entry into this space has got a bit of an advantage, because existing media, if you take an existing radio station, They almost having to play catch up when it comes to conversions because they've been doing radio for such a long time in the way that they've been doing it that it's almost difficult. It is actually quite difficult for them to adapt. Whereas with the concept with your radio is to not necessarily be confined to one, as you say, medium of distribution, but to create an entity that's versatile from the get-go.
Correct, yes. Gavin, looking at your content, when you look at your content breakdown in terms of music, talk radio, perhaps actuality, news, travel, whatever it may be, give us a description of that.
When you look at the station, it's going to be, the format will be music and talk, about 60 music, 40 talk. Whatever we do on the radio though, I will cater for the Cape Flats first because that's going to be the biggest market, initial market I perceive. And so of the content, 50% will be localized content. And whether it be in terms of music, it will be 50% local music, of which 20% will be Cape Town based music. In terms of the talk content, and this is, I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. The talk content though is the thing that I think will set your radio apart from anything else servicing the Cape Flats. And yes, it is servicing the Cape Flats because I think the Cape Flats is an area that I think every other radio station is sort of leaving behind. I mean, the big commercial stations around Cape Town are too busy pitching at the higher LSMs to be able to look at the Cape Flats, whereas the established community radio stations, I think they're not really, most of them are not really delivering, and this is a big statement, I know they'll have my head for this, but I'm bold enough to make it, they're not really delivering on that mandate.
I think this has got to do with business. And like you're saying, benching up to the higher LSM is what media seem to do so that we have an X amount of advertisers coming in. But I think many media is failing to see that when one looks at the Cape Flats, there's a considerable buying power in the amount of people we've got there and what they purchase and how they purchase. The higher LSM might be purchasing more houses and cars, but people on the Cape Flats really buy commodities in terms of food and all that kind of thing, and people are missing that point.
People are missing.
So they're going to have both of our heads now.
Excuse me?
They're having both of our heads now.
Yeah, they are. I think so. Look, I'm glad to have an ally in this already. Let's put it this way. If you live in a place, in a suburb like Mitchell's Plain, you're already in a house that chances are you've either already paid off or you are nearing paying off because it's not very expensive to live there. But your biggest concern is how do I put bread in my kid's mouth? And so where your radios are going to be pitched is not going to be at that high end of that market. It's going to be exactly pitched at that. And in order to pitch and be viable as a business entity, part of the plan is to actually create an infrastructure where local businesses can tap into resources that your radio will be made available. In other words, your radio will almost have to create its own way to stay sustainable, as opposed to the traditional way of you go out and go to an established business and get him to come on board. Your radio will be pitched in terms of business towards working with business to ensure that business is sustainable in order to support your radio, if you understand the concept, as giving a little bit to gain in the long run. It's not a flash in the pan, get rich quick scheme. It's not that. This is going to be a community radio in the true sense of that word. And it's not community radio in just people listening and tuning into community-based content, but also in terms of building up community. And I think an important part of community is business, because without business, the community will falter. And your radio will falter, and so we're going to create partnerships, not just in terms of what can I give in terms of airspace, but what can I give in terms of developing business that's going to in turn support your radio at the end of the day.
Gavin, I have one problem with media when it comes to community media and local media and smaller media, and I start calling them tabloid media after a while, because for some odd reason these entities believe that because we're speaking to a people that is of a lower LSM and a lower income group and might be living in certain conditions, that we need to feed them junk and they will read it and they will listen to it and they will watch it. I think it's time we start changing those things. You can have a radio station that approaches that market, but it might be your job to educate them instead of giving them a page 3, for example, and stories that are all rubbish stories because you think they buy that. It's time we start changing that. I don't know what's your thoughts about that.
Those are my thoughts exactly. The idea behind your radio is to enhance positive mindsets. I'm not going to say change mindsets. What I want to rather do is enhance positive mindsets. I'm going to quote just 3 examples. JP Dumini, very few people know that he comes from Strandfontein. He's the South African T20 cricket captain at the moment. When the story broke a few weeks ago, before they left for New Zealand and for Australia, the media said JP Dumini is the new, captain of the T20 squad, but very few people say the man from Strandfontein. And this is exactly where that's positive spin. This is where I'll be giving it a positive spin. I'll be using the fact that he comes from Strandfontein, that he comes from the Cape Flats, in order to show other youngsters following that, look, you can come from the Cape Flats and make it big as a captain of South Africa. I know of somebody who was at school with me exactly the same year, who went on to become a director at a company like Old Mutual. Now that's a positive story that needs to be told, but very few people know about that story. So it's not that I'm going to change mindsets. What I'm going to try and do is enhance existing mindsets, and that's the culture that I was talking about earlier and alluding to earlier, is that's the kind of people that I will be bringing in on board at the station. And I'm not saying if you perceive yourself to be inadequate that you're not going to be part of the station. It's exactly that. It's a perception, and through the actions and through the way and the culture of your radio, I'm going to hope that people's minds or mindsets will be altered. The third example that I want to bring in is myself. I mean, I grew up in Mitchell's Plain as well, and one of the things that I often get from people when they discover that I come from Mitchell's Plain is, but you don't sound like somebody coming from Mitchell's Plain. And my first response
So they say like, you don't sound like you're from Mitchell's Plain.
My first response usually is, what does somebody from Mitchell's Plain sound like? And often people would then start thinking, you know what does somebody from Mitchell's Plain really sound like? So
you'll be tackling stereotypes and stuff like that as part of your campaign to society, to better society, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. The drive would be to better and upgrade society, and well, let me rather not say better society. Let me say it's take society back to its first principles, which are those good values that I was talking about earlier. Remember, because that's where we started back in 1994 when I was growing up in Mitchell's Plain. That's the kind of society that I knew. Today it's eroded slightly from there. However, there's still a lot of good. I mean, we often hear people talking about it's the 1 or 2 rotten apples that infect the rest of the basket. What I'm saying is I'm going to try and enhance the 90 good apples and bring them up. And hopefully then the 1 apple will not be in a position to affect the 90 good apples.
Correct, yes. Now, Gavin, I know that you've just switched on some level and you're going to be activating different levels of your broadcast. How do people tune in right now if they want to listen to what's going on, and what's the plan for the future?
Right now, let's deal with that first. Right now, we are audio streaming. It's the only way you can catch up with your.
We're going to have those links at the bottom of the screen. So,
yes.
So at the moment, you're on the streaming only.
Yeah, it is on streaming at yourradio.listen2, as in the digit 2, listen2myradio.com. It's where you can log on to. The future plan, obviously, is to try and get onto a satellite platform, as is with Deen TV. I'm actually wanting to get onto Starsat. Simply because it's not very expensive for people to access you, yes. To access your radio. It would, and I realize that it would be the only privately run radio station that would be on that bouquet. But those are things that we'll deal with, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity actually, because if we can make it work, it should open the doors for others to follow as well.
Yes.
I am in discussions with ICASA and with Centec about possibly getting an FM frequency. It's very difficult, let's put it that way, as it is in Cape Town, but I've got a few ideas which I obviously cannot divulge at this stage. But then, the future of radio, and this is why I'm not calling it your FM, and I've spoken about this before, the future of radio though is going to be digital. So even though...
It's already started.
It's already started. Yeah. Even though I'm saying now that you can access us online, don't lose that URL, because in time to come that will be the primary way in which people will be able to access us. So people might as well get used to it now already.
Gavin, we've reached the end of the interview. It's nice having you on this side at least, and not watching you on TV doing the news and listening to you. I know that we are definitely going to follow up with you in the next couple of weeks to find out how things are going, and we wish you well with this venture. And obviously that Deen TV supports you in what you're doing, and we'll continue doing that.
Well, likewise, your radio has already pledged support to Deen TV, even though we're the baby in this relationship. But Faizal, thank you very much for accommodating me here, and I'm sure we'll reciprocate once your radio is up and running solid.
Thank you, Gavin. The man from Mitchell's Plain, doing things big and planning to do things big. Your radio, watch out for it. Until next time, goodbye.